Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It's recording. I'll just change my name and we can get started. So I am again recording a daf ahead of time in some strange place, the poster bed. And today's daf that I'm recording ahead of time is daf Mem Hey 45 in Sechet Chullin. It's the daf for Sunday. So yesterday, if you listen, let's say Shabbat or on Shabbat, you learned the daf. We learned daf Mem Daled, where we continued our discussion about treifot. This is complicated stuff. It's very complicated. If you have pictures or a Gemara with pictures, it would help your life tremendously. I can't give you pictures, so you can either imagine, I'll describe it. If you know something about anatomy, it helps too. Animals are very similar to people in many regards. Of course, there are differences, but very, very similar. But yesterday, we had a long discussion about when you have holes in the esophagus, right, or the gullet, which are very small holes would possible, or holes in the kana or the trachea, which you could actually have a much larger hole. It has to be rubo. We talked about what rubo means. So says Rav Yehuda Amarav, nikva kinafa. Let's say you have a hole. Sorry, we're on Daf Memhe, the second line, I believe. Top line. Top line of Memhe Amar Aleph Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav. Said Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, if you have a hole in the windpipe, sorry, in the trachea, that's the size that is a sorry, I did a little wrong. That's like a sieve, meaning it's a lot of very small holes. Nitztarfin leruba. They can combine, even though every specific hole is not big enough, of course, for it to be a majority. But if you put them all together, it would be a majority, and therefore it would be puzzle. They can be mitzarif. Mativ Rabbi Yirmiyah. Ask Rabbi Yirmiyah, what about the following? I feel like I'm doing the wrong daf. What about No, I think I'm doing the right stuff. Asked Rav Yirmiyah, what about the following Mishnah? The Mishnah says, if you have a skull, and this is a Mishnah, we referred these Mishnahs earlier, talking about when something is mitame ba'ohel, it has to be intact. And the flip side of that is that if it's not intact, it's not mitame ba'ohel, but it's also a treifa. If it is intact, it's mitame, but it's not a treifa. And the shear that we gave by Tuma of a skull was if you have one hole in the skull, right, that's long, right, not a round hole. Even if you have many individual holes, says the Mishnah, mitzdarfin lemalo makdech. They can combine to the size of a makdeach in a skull. The size that would make it not a skull is a makdech, which is a drill that they would do, I guess, when people had high pressure in their brains. That was probably very painful, but they would drill a hole in it. So let's say it's not in one spot, but it's in multiple spots, or it's not round, it's elongated. You can imagine, you calculate the area. Alma, what you see from there is a kivan d'shiura malo makdeach, that since the size is a malo makdeach, meaning the size of a psul is a drill in the regards to a skull, the malo makdeach mitzdarfinan. If you have a lot of small holes, they combine to a malo makdeach. Hachanami says Rav Yirmiyah here too, by a trachea, we're going to see, we saw it yesterday, we're going to see it more. I'm sorry, we're going to see it in a week or so, that the size of Isser of a trachea is not just the majority of the trachea, that's if you cut through it. If you have a hole in the trachea, it's the size of an Isar, which is a coin, which is smaller, presumably, than a majority. So what you should see here is that Kivan de Shira Hachanami Kivan Shira ki Isar, since the shear of a space that's missing in the trachea is an Isar, why don't you say a lot of small holes are a isar mitzdarfinan? They should combine to an isar. You don't need to have a rove. You could just combine them all into the shear that would be missing, that would passel the trachea. It says the Gemara, Rabbi Yirmiyah, you made a big mistake. You forgot, or you don't remember what Rav Chelbo Amar Chama Bar Goria said in the name of Rav, that there's a big difference between a hole that is missing a part. If you cut out a part of the trachea, then the shear is an isar, right, which is a coin. But if you're cutting through the trachea, you're actually not cutting out any part of it, right? Meaning trachea could be 6 inches wide. So you've got to cut through it 3 inches to be a majority. I mean, that would be a very large trachea, but let's just say a big animal. So there, you're not actually removing any part of the trachea. You're just cutting through it. So when you put a knife into something, you don't actually cut a part out. So there's a different shear between cutting it, which like when you make a lot of holes in it, right? You don't actually remove anything, you just separate it, or when you cut out a piece. And that's what Reb Chamer Bar Guria said in the name of Rav, the nikavim sheyesh b'hem chisaron. If you have holes that are cut out, that are punched out, parts of the trachea, mitzdarfin l'kisar, certainly those would be, just like the skull, they would combine to make an isar, and that would passel it. But she'ein b'hem chisaron, if there's no missing part, you just made a hole and you made a cut, then mitzdarfin l'ruba, then you have to get rove and you can combine them, but until you have rove, it's not passel. Now, Amar Rabbi Baruch Hanan Rabbi Shimon Levi, what if you have instead of a round part, but nitzla himenu ritzua, you take a strip of the trachea down, meaning instead of cutting trachea as a pipe, instead of cutting across the trachea, you cut down the trachea. So do you say, says Rabbi Baruch Hanan named Rabbi Shimon Levi, that also is mistaref hisar, that combines. If you cut out a strip and if you made it into a round area, was an isser, then it's possible. By me, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, asked Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani from Yeshua ben Levi, what if you make a hole kinapa mahu? Nikva kinapa mahu. What if you make a hole like a sieve, meaning you make many, many small holes, which was the case we sort of just asked about. Amlai said, look, we already answered that question. If you have nikavim sheyesh b'hem chisaron mitzdarfin l'kisar, if you have holes that are missing, meaning you punched out something, then it's mitzdarfin l'kisar, and if ein bo chisaron, then it's mitzdarfin l'ruba. Then you have to have a majority of the area of the esophagus, the trachea. Now, what about a bird? B'ofamai. What would be the halacha by the windpipe of a bird, by the trachea of a bird, which obviously is much, much smaller? Now, remember that a bird can't obviously have the size of an isar. An isar is a huge size when compared to a bird. So what is the size? Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Nachmani, says Rav Yitzchak Bar Nachmani, l'didi mefar sheli. Sorry, I'm trying to find the Gemara. Where are we up to? The last second of the wide lines. L'didi mefar sheli mina Reb Elazar. I was explained this in the name of Reb Elazar, that what you do is that if you have a bird's trachea and you have very small holes in it, or even one hole, you don't have to look for the size of an isar. It has to be smaller than that. What you do is mikaplo, you fold it over. So meaning you cut out the area, it's dead. You cut out the area around the holes in the trachea. And you take that area and you see how big it is. You put it on the top of the trachea, meaning on the opening, and you look im chofet rova kanef. It covers the majority of the kana treifa. That's a treifa. Imav kshera. If not, it's kosher. It says Rav Papa, the way you can remember this test, simanech nafya. It's like a sieve, right? Same way with the sieve. Basically, you would take it and you would put on the top. That's how you clean out, right? The flour goes through the thing. You're basically taking the area that was cut out in the trachea. Remember, the trachea is longitudinal, but you cut out little holes in the side. You cut out that section, put it on top, and see if it covers the majority. If it does, it's a treifa. If not, it's kosher. Now, what about if you cut a hole in the trachea, but instead of cutting it out, removing it, you cut three sides. So niftecha kedelet, you open up an area like, or this happened before the animal died, of course, right before shechita, like a delet, like a door, right? So the question then is, what's the shear? We said if it's missing a part, it's an isar, right? Is that the same if you cut it open, even though you didn't actually detach the part that you cut? So it says Rav Nachman, the shear is Kdeshi Kanes Isar L'Rochbo. It's where you can take an Isar, and in the width of the Isar, meaning the wider part of the Isar, I guess the Isar was not perfectly round, it was a little misshapen. If the wide part of the Isar, meaning the longer part, can go into this hole, then it's puzzle. Nistika. Now, what if it's cracked? So which is sort of like longitudinal. It's instead of being one cut all the way through in horizontal way, it's going in the vertical way. So it's cracked down the side of the trachea. Says Rav, well, you actually don't, that's not a problem. Because you only need one segment of the trachea above the crack and one below, kshera, then it would be kosher. And again, the idea is that will the animal live? Will it recover? So remember, when you cut through a trachea, it separates if you cut through a majority, and it obviously doesn't function anymore. But here we're saying if you make a crack down the side, it'll stay in place because there's enough pressure on the top, enough pressure on the bottom, and it will still be suitable to heal and recover. Now, Amru Kamed Rabbi Yochanan, they said this statement, before Rabbi Yochanan, that it's kosher if there's one from Rav, if there's one segment above and one segment below. And Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, I don't understand. Ma chuya u'ma chuya to come Rav. What's this chuya business that Rav is talking about? Who says you need a chuya means a section above and below? Elaima, what I would say, says Rabbi Yochanan, arguing with Rav, presumably, I feel you only need a tiny bit. You don't even need a chuya. A chuya is a reasonable amount. You only need a tiny amount above and below the crack, and then it would be kshera. Now, Amru Kamed Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yonatan Hachi. In fact, they said in front of Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Yonatan had said the same thing, right? So they told Rabbi Yochanan, oh, Rabbi Yonatan in Bavel, Rabbi Yochanan was in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yonatan in Bavel said the same shot as you. Amr Lei, Rabbi Yochanan said in sort of a backhand compliment, Yadin Chavrin Bavlai Lafrushi Ki Aitama. I'm shocked that our Babylonian colleagues know a good shot. You know, they have a reputation for not being as smart as us, but clearly Rabbi Yonatan in Bavel had a good shot, which agrees with me, says Rabbi Yochanan. Now, Tana Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef Kamed Rabbi Yochanan. Now, Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef taught over a Braita, and we're like, I would say, 10 lines from the wide lines, almost halfway down the daf. Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef taught a Braita in front of Rabbi Yochanan, and the Braita says the following: Kol hatzavar kulo kasher l'shchita. Right? The whole trachea is kosher for shechita. Now, one of the issues that you have to think about when you have the trachea is, right, the trachea starts from the nostrils, I guess we'll say, right? From that, or pharynx, the larynx, I guess, from the vocal cords, right? And then as you go down the trachea, it becomes the lungs. And one of the questions is, where does the trachea end and the lungs begin? Now, if you think about it, and again, if you have a picture, you can see this very clearly, but the trachea comes down, let's just say, to halfway down your chest in a human. The lungs go all the way to the top of the chest. So meaning a lot of the lungs overlap the top of the trachea. They're not connected to it, right? So it goes down and then fills out the air spaces that go up. But says the Braita, the whole neck, the whole tsavar, not neck, the whole trachea is what it really means, but it means anywhere in the neck that the trachea is located, is kulo kasher l'shchita. You can shecht anywhere there, from mitabat gedola, from the top tabat, which is the top of the trachea, the top of the trachea right by the vocal cords, ad kanfei rea tachtona, until the lower edges of the rea means the lungs, to the bottom part of the lungs. Now, says Rava, that doesn't just be clarified. When we say the lower part of the lungs, we don't mean all the way at the bottom, at the feet of the animal. What we mean is, right, tachtona shihi el yona. It means the bottom part that is the upper part, meaning when you hang an animal upside down, which you do after you kill it, then the bottom part is the top part of the animal, meaning the part closest to the head is the bottom part. So when we say the tachtona of the lungs, we mean the elyona, we mean the top part closer to the head of the lungs. Sha'ani omer kol sheposhetet savara v'ro'a, any part where the cow or the animal stretches out its neck. And then, because imagine, if the animal is standing straight, there's a very small segment that's considered the neck. When it stretches out its head, it expands that, and you could shecht any part of that area. And what Rav is basically saying here, is that when the animal stretches out its neck, you're allowed to do shechita on the stretched out portion, as long as you're not forcing it. Meaning, as long as it's a natural motion of the animal, and you're not like pulling the neck out in order to do the shechita. Now, boy, Reb Chanina became Reb Chananya. Now, Reb Chanina, some say Reb Chananya asked, you're asking this question about where is the neck of an animal. And Rava is saying that the neck of the animal includes not just what's sort of the natural neck, but the stretched out neck if the animal stretches out its neck. But what if you stretch out the neck of the, and we said if you pull it, if you're honest, if you pull out the neck of the animal, that's not kosher. But what about, asked Rabbi Chananya, what if the animal itself did the onus? Meaning, ansa atzmo mahu. What if the animal stretched out its neck in a very forced way? That's not a natural motion. Is that considered to be a part of the neck that you could do shechita or not? And the answer is teiko. We don't actually know the answer. But Yativ, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon, and Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish sat, and they talked about this. And nafik milta mi beinayo, a psak, a word meaning a halacha, came out from between them that anas b'simanim v'shachat psua, right? If you pull out the simanim, you extend the trachea and the esophagus of the animal, and you shech that area that you extended, that would be puzzle because it's not the natural area of the simanim of the animal. But if nikav hakaneh, that's not but, and the second halacha that they taught is that if you make a hole in the trachea, remember holes in the trachea are a problem if they're big enough, but if it's lemata min hachazeh, if it's below the chazeh, chazeh literally means the chest, then nidon kureya, then you treat it like a lung. And so we're going to see the shirim of a lung later, but basically the isser of a hole in a lung is the prohibition or the treifa of a hole in the lung is a very small size. Any size hole in the lung, which is why we worry about, sirchot that we call in the lung, is because any size hole in the lung is a treifa. In the in the trachea, so the kaneh, we just said earlier today, and we'll see it later in a Mishnah, it has to be the size of an isar. So a small hole in the kaneh is not a problem. The question is, where does the kaneh end and the lung start? So what Rabbi Shimon Melakish and Rabbi Yochanan decided or told Paskin was that it depends on where the chest is. Anything below the breast of the animal is considered the lungs. Anything above towards the head is considered to be the trachea. Where's the chest? I don't know. But we're going to discuss this all a lot more later. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita, Ezehu chazeh. So where is the chazeh? Now, this Braita is not referring to trefot. It's referring to the fact that when it says by matnot kuhuna, right, it says you have to give the chazeh and the shok to the kohen. So the chazeh means the chest, the breast. What is the breast? Says the Braita, zero at the karka. That's the part of the animal that faces down, meaning when an animal is standing, the part that's facing the ground is called the chest. Limata, now what's the measure? So that's the direction, right? Meaning not the back of the animal, but the forward, the ground facing part. But what's the upper and lower limit of the chest? So says the Braita, limata, lower, right, is adat savar. Lower here means higher, right? To the neck of the animal. Limala, the other part is adat kares until it hits the stomach. Okay, the rumen of the stomach. So that is the shear. Chotech shteit salaot mishnei defanot elech ve'elech. You cut out two ribs closest to the head on both sides. V'zeh chazeh nitan lekohanim, and that's the chazeh that you give to the kohen. So you cut out two ribs and the whole under section, and you give that to the kohen, which is a pretty significant amount. Again, that is said by matznot kuhuna. Okay, the next sugya, we're up to the 2 dots, 8 lines from the bottom. The next thing we said in the Mishnah was nikav krum shalmoach. If you get a hole in the krum, the lining, the membrane around the skull, around the brain, right? So says Rav and Shmuel Damri Travayo, well, there are really 2 membranes. There's one that's sort of on the skull's a bone, right? The brain is whatever the brain is, tissue. Between the brain and the skull, there are 2 layers. There's the brain layer and the skull layer, right? It's got different, I forgot what they're called, dura something or another, dura matter and dura something. So there are 2 layers between, there's, one on the skull side and one on the brain side. Said Rav and Shmuel Damri Travayo, krama ila'a, the top layer, meaning the one on the skull, not even the one on the brain, even if you have a hole in that membrane, it's a treifa afagav lo inkav tat'a. Even if you didn't cut the lower membrane, which is closer to the brain, which of course is the more, we would think, is the more sensitive one. So says Rav and Shmuel, even the outer membrane is enough to make it a treifa. But some said that that's not what they said. They said ad inkav tata, that it's not a treifa unless you get a hole you make a nekev in the lower membrane of the skull, meaning the one around the brain. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, we see manech. Now there are, in fact, a mnemonic you can use to remember this, which is that chayta dimitnach be mocha. Think of the chayta, the sack that you put the brain inside of, meaning chayta, which is a simon for chaya, and it also means sack, is the one that you put the brain in, which is the inner one. Amar Rabbi Chama, Rabbi Chana, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Now said Rabbi Chana, and name Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. There's membranes in many parts of the body, but another place we have membranes that are similar is in the testicles, in the beitzim, and in the beitzim, right? Kenegdo b'beitzim, a similar concept in the beitzim, where you have an inner membrane that's, I guess, closer to the actual testicles themselves, and an outer membrane that's closer to the skin. The beitzim nikar, the equivalent membrane, is more clear in the beitzim, which means that you can tell the difference between the lining and the actual testicle itself. Amar Reb Shimon Pazi, Amar Reb Shua ben Levi, Mishum bar Kapara. If you have moach, right? Moach means the brain. Kol ma shebekidera nidon kemoach. Everything that's in the kedera was their term for the skull, right? The skull is the pot, the container that holds the brain. Anything within the skull is considered to be the brain, right? Meaning, obviously, there are linings of I mean, if you, there are many actually in between the actual brain matter, whatever that means, and the skull. Says Reb Shimon Levi in Bar Kapara, everything inside the container, everything inside the skull is considered to be brain, and if you get a hole in it or a missing part of it, that's going to be a psul. Okay. Now ask the Gemara, where does it where am I? Hitchil limashech, if it starts pulling, right, meaning the point where you can actually pull and you can move the skull, which means you go from the brain into the spinal cord, that's nidon kichut hashidra. Then from there already, you start treating it like the chut hashidra. So where it's inside the container, which means the skull, it's brain. When it gets outside the container and it goes down the body, it's called the spinal cord. And there are different shiurim of treifa in the brain and in the spinal cord. Says Gemara, well, how do you find that area? Like, what's the moment where it stops being brain and becomes spinal cord? So heichan matchili mashech. Where is the area where it begins to extend and becomes brain to spinal cord and therefore changes its status, right? Obviously, the brain is connected. It's just a bundle of nerves of nerves that go down to the spinal cord. So where's the separation? Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani said, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani, I heard this from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi personally, that Kamin Shnei Pulin, turn to Daf Mem Hey Amud Bet, there are like two little pulin. Pul is literally a bean, right? There's two little bean size or bean shaped things. Yesh Munachin Al Pia Kedera, they are attached to the skull. So most understand that these are bones, basically, right? So that they are, or protrusions in the bone that are at the level where the skull opens up and leaves, the brain leaves the skull. There are two little beans. Again, this is in animals. I don't know if people have something similar. Minapolim ulifnim kilifnim. From the beans, that area, and upwards, meaning into the brain, is like the brain. Minapolim ulechutz, if it goes downwards or towards the spinal cord, that's the spinal cord, lechutz. Now, the area right at that place where the polin atzman, Eina Yudea, I don't know for sure what the status is of that area. Umistavra kilifnim. It makes sense that you would treat it like lifnim. I don't know if that's just a chumrah, you're treating it like lifnim, or because it's there, presumably it's very important for the brain function, but presumably that part you would treat like lifnim. Rashi does not say exactly why you would treat it lifnim, but that's how I understand it. And Rabbi Yirmiyah Badak Be'ofa, Rabbi Yirmiyah actually wanted to test this out. So I get maybe they couldn't afford a big animal, but he took a bird and he killed it, or maybe shechted it, and then he started, what do we call it in anatomy class? He started dissecting it, and Ishkach, he actually found Kimin Shnei Polin Munuchin Al Pi Kedera. He found these two bean-sized things. Now, on a bird, they might even be smaller than beans, but these two tiny little things that were sitting at the opening of the skull, and that is the entryway of the skull. Most understand, again, there's others, the Rambam seems to say something different, that they're nerves actually, but I think it's the Rambam, but most understand these are, part of the bones that actually connect the skull to the vertebrae, right? So you have a cervical spine, C1, as they call it, which connects to the skull, so that there are these little tiny pulin that make that connection, that they sort of hook on top of, which is a little challenging because birds don't seem to have that anatomically, but whatever the Gemara means, that's what we're going to take. So that is the halacha of the holes in the brain. The next thing we have, 5 lines from the top of Daf Mem Hey Amud Bet, 5 lines from the top at the 2 dots, was what the Mishnah said. The next treifa was nikaf halev. If the heart gets a hole inside of it, the beit chalalo, inside the halal, inside the hollow part, or what we call the chamber of the heart. Now, as everybody knows, I think, maybe I shouldn't say everyone knows, there are different components of the heart. There's the atria and the ventricles, the smaller components, which are the atria, and the larger components, which are the ventricles. All mammals, I think, or certainly the mammals I'm familiar with, have 2 sides of their heart, because all the blood comes into the heart from the body through what's called the vena cava, superior and inferior vena cavas. They that's the right heart. They get pumped in the right heart into the lungs, where the carbon dioxide is released and oxygen is sent into the blood, and then they go to the left side of the heart, or the left ventricle and the left atria, where it gets pumped into the body through what's called the aorta. Right, that's our anatomy lesson for today. So, asked Rabbi Zera, when we say there's a hole in the heart, into the hollow part of the heart, is that lebeit chalal katan or lebeit chalal gadol? Is that the small part of the heart, which I'm explaining means the atria, or is it the larger component of the heart, the ventricles? Amalei Abaya said, Abaya, what kind of question is that? Mighty Bailach. Why are you asking the question? It's a Mishnah. Milotznan, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Shimon Omer, ad shetina kev lebeta simponot. Rabbi Shimon said that it has to have a hole into the simponot. Now, the simponot are the tubes that go to the lung, meaning the bronchi, right? So it has to go all the way through to the bronchi. And what does that mean? That's not the heart. Amar Rabba bar Tachlifa, Amar Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amar Rav, right? Said Rabbi Tachlifa Rabba bar Tachlifa, in the name of Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amar Rav, ad shetinakev l'simpona gadol. When we talk about getting a hole in the lungs, we're referring to the biggest component, what we would call the main bronchus, right, or the left or right main bronchus, right? And the corollary would be that if by the lungs we talk about a hole being in the large part of the lungs, by the heart we talk about a hole being into the large part of the heart. So therefore, just like by the lungs it was the simpona gadol, so too by the heart it must be chalala gadol. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? What kind of question? What kind of proof is that? Hachi hashta. How could you compare one case to the other? Hatam, there the Mishnah specifically said lebeit simponot katani, which was a lashon of simponot, which means where all of the bronchi empty into, right? Lahecha de shafchi simponot kulo. Simponot implies it's the major bronchus where all the other bronchi come in, so it's the central one. Here it doesn't say lebeit chalalo, right? Hacha, I mean, it does say lebeit chalalo. It doesn't say plural. Hacha lebeit chalalo katani. It says lashon yachid, the empty heart, the empty part of the heart, the chamber in the heart, the hollow part. Mali chalal gadol, mali chalal katan. How can you prove from that language whether it's referring to the large ventricle or the atria? We don't know. We don't actually know from this Mishnah, and that was his question, and we leave this, at least according to this opinion, unresolved in the Gemara. The next thing was Knei Halev, the pipes that go into the heart. Now, this is we are at the Knei, the last word on the second to last narrow line. So what do we mean by the pipes that go into the heart? So the simplest understanding is the aorta, right? So the aorta is the big pipe that comes out of the heart, essentially, where all of the blood gets pushed out of. Now we'll see it's a little complicated in the Gemara, and of course their understanding of anatomy, though probably very accurate because they had animals, but it doesn't always correspond to what terminology we use. So what is the shear of a hole in the aorta? So remember, a shear of hole in the heart is a small thing, right? A mashu. What about the aorta? So Rav Amr b'mashu. Rav says it's just like the heart. It's a tiny bit would make it a treifa. And Shmuel says berubo. Shmuel says no. Once you're in the aorta, you're out of the heart. You can tolerate a small tear, and it has to be the majority. Ask the Gemara, what are you talking about? Hai ninu knei halev. What blood vessel are you talking about when you talk about the knei halev? Amar Rabbi Bar Yitzchak Amar Rav. It means chelev shal agabi defanot. It means the blood vessel that's in the fat that's on the walls of the animal. Now we think that means the sides of the animal, which is nowhere near the heart, right? Defanot usually means the flanks. It says Gemara defanot sal kadaitach. We don't. What are you talking about? Right? What do the flanks have to do with anything? Ella, what we mean is agabe dofnei reya. The blood vessel that goes on the wall of the lungs. And that, of course, is the aorta, because when the aorta leaves the heart, again, I don't have pictures to show you, but hopefully you can look at pictures, it curves back around, right? The heart goes up, or the animal's straight, but it goes, well, anyways, in humans, it goes up and curves around and goes down the back of the lungs, basically. Not the back, right? It's attached in a bunch of fat to the lungs. So although in all the anatomy books you see it separate, in fact, it's got layers and layers of fat and connective tissue that keep it together at the back of the lung, and that's what we mean. It runs down the lung. It's not inside the heart. It's the big blood vessel that goes out of the heart. Amar Rav Amemar Mishmei Rav Nachman. Now it says Amemar the name of Rav Nachman. In fact, there's three major entry and exit pipes into the heart. Slata kanehavi. There's three major pipes that go into the heart. One, chad parish liba. One goes to the heart, to the liba, to the liver. Sorry, one goes to the liver. Now, again, that's not clear if they understood exactly the direction that blood flowed, because just to be clear, the inferior vena cava takes blood from the whole body. It goes through the liver and into the heart. So I'm not sure if they understood and thought that the blood was going from the heart into the liver, or they didn't know that it was going the other direction, or that's just the language. It seems to travel to the liver. But one major blood vessel is the blood vessel that goes from the body through the liver into the heart, and we call that the vena cava. Again, they didn't have those words, but it's one vessel goes from the liver. Chad parish l'reya. One vessel, we call them the pulmonary arteries, go to the lungs, right? So they go into the right side of the heart. The right ventricle pumps the blood into the lungs. So one vessel goes into the lungs. It then comes back from the lungs. They didn't quite catch that part. And then there's a huge, sorry, I did it all wrong. I read, the first one is, I'm sorry, I read it a little bit wrong. The first goes, the liba is not the liver, sorry, it's the heart, right? So one goes to the heart. Chad parish l'reya, one goes to the lungs, and chad parish l'kavda, and one goes to the liver. So I just got them out of order, but those are the three major blood vessels. So one goes out of the heart, and like we just said, it attaches to the lung. That's the aorta. One goes into from the lungs back into the heart, right? So basically, it's the circulation from the heart to the lungs and back to the heart. And one comes from the liver, which is what I said is the vena cava. Says Rev Meimar in the name of Rev Nachman, the way you treat them in terms of treifa, direya kareya, the one in the lungs you treat like the lungs, and therefore even a small amount of perforation will make it puzzle, right? Even a small amount. The kavda kikavda, the one in the liver is like the liver, and therefore we'll see later how much of liver you have to be missing, but it's not a small amount. And deliba pliga, the one in the heart, is where Rav and Shmuel have a machloket about whether you treat it like the liver or you treat it like the lungs. Mar bar Chia mati ibcha. Now, in fact, Mar bar Chia had it a little bit different. He said that direya, the one that goes along the lungs, kikavda, you treat that like the liver in terms of the amount it needs to have a hole in it to be a treifa. The kavda, the one that comes from the liver, is treated like the lungs, kireya. And the liba pliga, where they argue, is about the one that goes to the heart. So anyways, that is the way that we understood it. And Azla Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, now Rabbi Chia bar Yosef went, Amr l'shmaita de Rav kamei de Shmuel, and he told over the halacha that Rav said. Remember, Rav's halacha a few lines ago was that if you have even a small, remember we said kanei alev, you have the main, we think it's the main vessel of the heart. Rav said a mashahu and Shmuel said rubo, right? So Rav Chia bar Yosef came and said the shmaita of Rav in front of Shmuel, that Rav said it's puzzle with a mashahu. Amar Lane, you know what Shmuel said? Hihachi Amar Abba, if this is what Abba said, remember we had, I don't know if it was yesterday or a week ago, I don't remember where we are. I think it was a week ago. We had where Shmuel called Rav Abba, right? And we said it was endearing. Here he's criticizing him, but he does call him that. He says, if this is what Abba says, Lo yada b'treifot v'lo klum, he does not know anything about treifot. So I don't know what Rav was thinking, but Rav does not know what he's talking about because, and again, Shmuel argued and said it has to be a majority as opposed to Rav, who said it could be even a mashu. So again, you see Shmuel referring to Rav as Abba, but unlike last week where we said it was a compliment, here he's criticizing him. I remember we had the other pshat in Tosfot that Abba was his name, and he was called Rav by his students because he was the Rebbe, right? He was the Rav. Anyways, continues the Gemara now. We're at the sixth wide line at the two dots. The next case in our Mishnah of Treifa was Nishbar Hashedra, right? I think the Mishnah should have said Nishbira because it's Shedra is Nikeva. Anyways, the spine is broken. Now, what does that mean? The spine is broken. Remember, it does not mean what we think of when we talk about people having back pain, where their spinal processes, right, are the bones in the spine are degenerated or whatever, or broken. It's talking about where the spine itself, the cord, the spinal cord is broken. So Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita, what does that mean broken? Chuta shedra shenifsak berubo. If the spinal cord is separated in the majority, it's puzzle. Divrei Rebbe. Rabbi Yaakov Omer, no, you don't need a majority. I feel a nikev, even a hole in the spinal cord is considered to be a treifa. Hora Rebbe Rabbi Yaakov. Now, in fact, Rebbe came around, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, right, and paskin like Rabbi Yaakov that even a small amount. Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna, well, I don't think that's the halacha. Ain't halacha like Rabbi Yaakov. I disagree. Halacha is not like Rabbi Yaakov. So clearly they argued about this. And ask the Gemara again, we've had this similar concept before. When you say majority, what do you mean by majority? Kamarubo. What do you mean by a majority? So Rav says it means rov oro, right? It means the rove of the skin, meaning if you take the spinal cord, there's layers around it. And when we say rove, we mean the entire thing with the layers around it. Similar concept to what we have with the trachea. The Amrila, but some say it means rove mocho, it means the majority of the actual matter inside, the nerves inside the spinal cord, the moach, we call it the brain, but the nerves inside, not the membranes around it. So even if you have a majority of the nerves, that's a majority, and that is puzzle. Now, manda amar rov mocho, if you say a majority means a majority of the nerves inside, kol shekain rov oro, it would be for sure if you cut the majority of the outside as well, because that's a bigger cut, and so it's less likely to heal. But lemanda amar rov oro, but if the one, but ask that's one point. Says but according to one who said you need a majority of the outside, rov mochomai, is it a treifa if you don't, if you only have the inside, so you only cut a rove of the inside of the spinal cord. You didn't necessarily cut a rove of the outside. So Tashma, what's the halacha? Is it a treifa? So Tashma, let's come prove it from the following case. The Amar Nivli, I don't know who Nivli was, but I guess an Amora, said, Amar Rav Huna, in the name of Rav Huna, Rubo Sha'amru, when they said rove, talking about the spinal cord, it meant rove oro, right? And our question was, what about rove of the moach? And he said, rov moach zeh, but when you talk about the moach, the actual nerves on the inside, lo malev, lo morid, that doesn't help or doesn't hurt. Meaning, if you don't have a majority of the outside, not the outside only, but the whole circumference, having just a majority of the inside is not enough to make it a treifa. Now, Rav Natan bar Avin, Haviyatav Kamei de Rav. Now, Rav Natan bar Avin, who was a student, I guess, was once sitting in front of Rav, and we've had many cases before where they basically gave them, test cases, right? So this was like a bechina. Tell us what it is, right? Where are we? Around 20 lines on the bottom, I'd say. So he was sitting in front of Rav, Badak Birov Oro, and he checked in the rove of the outside of the including the skin around, not the skin, the membranes around the spinal cord. The Kabadak Birov Mocho, right? And then he started checking the inside. And so he checked first the outside. It wasn't a majority of that. And then he went separately to check the inside and see if the cut was a majority of the inside. Amarle, and Rav said to him, no, you don't have to worry about this. In Rov Oro Kayam, if you have a majority of the outside, whether the inside is cut or not cut does not matter. So as long as the outside is intact, it will recover, it will heal. You might be paralyzed partly. I don't know if it'll heal 100%, but the animal will live, and you don't have to worry about it for a treifa. Now, Amar Rabba Bar B'Chanan Rabbi Shimon Levi, said Rabba Bar B'Chanan Rabbi Shimon Levi, let me just point out something. When we talk about the spinal cord, there's a difference between different abnormalities of the spinal cord. Nitmarech, if the spinal cord becomes rach means it's soft, and it becomes basically liquid, right? Then pasul. That is an animal that's not going to live, it's pasul, and that's a treifa. But nitmases, if it just becomes nitmases, which is another verb for becoming soft, right? Then pasul, it's also pasul. Now, asking what are those two different things? Ezu hamracha ve'ezu hamsasa. What's interesting is something that is marech, which is rach because it's soft, or masmes, which means that it's also soft. So hamracha means that it becomes like liquid. Kol shenishpach kikiton. You could pour it like any kind of liquid. You pour it out like you would be pouring out a jug. So that basically the if you cut open the spinal cord, the nerves are damaged and they flow like water. Hamsasa, the nismes means they're crushed, but it's eno yachol la'amod. It can't maintain its structure, right? So it'll collapse if you stand it up because it's become soft, but it's not actually going to pour out like water. So anyways, both of those are puzzle and they're different weaknesses in the spinal cord. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah, what if when we say you can't stand, what if it's because it weighs so much, right? It's not because it's damaged and diseased and the nerves are ruined. It's if it can't stand, meaning the spinal cord cannot stand up because it weighs so much, so it drops over, is that considered to be an inadequate spinal cord or not? Teku, and so he did not have a resolution for this. And Beirav Amri, but in the house of Rav, when they were talking about different components of disease in the spinal cord and what's a treifa, they said nitmasmes, if it became liquefied or softened, not liquefied, softened, that's pasul. But nitmazmes, if it just became nitmazmes, right, then then it is kosher. Now nitmazmes literally means that it was emptied, so meaning it sort of disappeared. So if the spinal cord just meaning it's not there and soft, it's sort of gone. So, and this happens, of course, as people get older, right? When their nerves and their brains shrink a lot. So if the spinal cord shrinks down, that's kosher. Meitvei asked him, what about the Braita? Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer behemat shenit mazmez mocha trefa. An animal's brain shrunk down and got severe disease and basically becomes empty. It's a trefa. Says that's a mistake. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar did not say nit mazmes. He said ahi nit masmes itmar. He said nit masmes, which was when we talked about it's there, but it's very soft. There it's diseased and damaged, and there would be a treifa. But if it's just missing, it wouldn't be a treifa. Says Gemara, is that really true? Aini, is that true? Where are we up to? Sorry. We are 2, 4, 6, 8 lines in the bottom. Is that true? V'ha Levi haviyativ be masuta. Levi was once sitting in the masuta, was the bathhouse, and Chaziel who gavra did tarya. He saw a guy who banged his head, right? Meaning he saw someone slip in the bathtub, bang, get a huge head wound on the hard floor. Amar. So he said, Levi saw it happen, and he said, Nitmazmez mochadadein. His brain is going to be totally shook up, right? Nitmazmez is the word. It's going to be emptied out, and it's going to die. Lav delochai don't presumably what he meant was he's going to die. And so you see that in a human, when you get a big injury and your brain becomes nitmazmez, you're not able to live. So that should be a treifa. Amar Bai said, "Lo, Lomar she'ino molid." All he was saying was that he won't be able to have children, right? So I'm not sure exactly why, but that basically he's going to get a severe enough wound. He might be not get an erection, not be able to function, but that's going to cause damage. But it doesn't mean he's going to die necessarily. It just means he's not going to be able to procreate and have children. So, anyways, you can't prove from there that a brain that's nitmazmez will automatically become a treifa. I'm trying to think, should we do a few more lines? 2, 6. I think not. I think I'm going to stop here. Sorry if we're going to leave a little bit extra for Monday, but we're going to stop at 6 lines from the bottom, the first word on the line, which is the question of ad heichen chuta shidra. So we will continue the discussion tomorrow on Monday, which is when hopefully everyone's going to be learning Daf Mem Vav, which is how far down, right, as the spinal cord continues down, it ends at some point. How far do we still call it the spinal cord? And I will leave that here to pick it up tomorrow on Monday and wish everyone a Shavua Tov. Thank you.